Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for my NACL Spring 2023 Finals overview and analysis. I'm super excited to get to this one. It's the first finals that we're doing in 2023 spring. Again, if you don't count winter split in the LEC, which is obviously a very different structure, but this is the first spring split finals we are doing across any of the regions in the world, and I'm incredibly excited to get to do it for the NACL. This has been one of, if not my single favorite region to watch over the course of this split so far. Just so many players that I think playing above expectation level. You know, we've been seeing a lot of the awards come out for NACL. Obviously, congratulations to Mir on winning Most Valuable Prospect. There are obviously some funny little caveats, I would say, that come with Mir winning Most Valuable Prospect when he's been a pro for a very long time, but still congratulations. He had a great split for a Team Liquid team that did phenomenal in the playoffs, but it really did, like, seeing the voting for that really did open my eyes to, like, how many players were really good in the NACL this split, because when I was doing my own voting, or at least my own predictive voting, there were so many players that I wanted to give props to, and it really was just like, man, there were so many good players this split, and so it really just opened my eyes to how good the NACL has been. Of course, I've covered every single game this split, not only in the regular season, but in the playoffs as well, and I'm about to cover the finals. Really excited to get into this, but let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of the series. Who did you think was going to win going into it, and did the series live up to your expectations? Obviously, the two teams that are facing off today had fought before, but did you think it was going to go the same way, or did you see it maybe swinging a different way? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions, and of course, let me know your thoughts on the entirety of the NACL Spring Split down below as well. Just, you know, with everything wrapping up here, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback before we kind of put a little bow on everything that happened in the NACL. But of course, this is going to be about the series itself, so I don't want to waste too much time for you guys. I've already wasted 2 minutes. Let's go ahead and jump right into the coverage for our matchup between the number 2 seeded Dignitas Challengers and the number 1 seeded Cloud9 Challengers. Incredibly excited to see this. These two teams obviously just played last weekend as well. They played off against each other in winners finals. Cloud9 going down to that third place game and being able to take down Team Liquid to kind of secure this rematch, but Dignitas definitely getting the better of them in that series. It was relatively dominant coming out from Dig. They definitely were the better team. Now, there were moments where I think C9 definitely looked okay. Diplex in particular, I think, had moments where he looked good. Fake God had a really good week last week just in general, but I think when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, Dignitas was definitely the better team in that first series, and so you would expect them to be able to come out here with a little bit of momentum, but Cloud9 should theoretically be the best team in the NACL. They have been really all split long. They've just kind of been the most dominant. There really hasn't been a lot of teams that have been able to compete with them consistently. Even the teams that have been able to beat them have not been able to do it, you know, more than once or twice this split, and so Dignitas definitely has a big challenge ahead. It was tough beating them once. It's even tougher beating them twice. I think my prediction for this series was Cloud9 in 5. I thought it would be incredibly close, but Cloud9 to me is the best team in the NACL. But with everything that happened with Dignitas, like if they were able to win it in 3 games even, like I wouldn't really be all that surprised. The spread is the entire gambit here. I could see basically every single possibility happening. So what ended up happening? What ended up going down between these two teams? Of course, we're going to go game by game talking about the advantages and the disadvantages for both teams in each. And so we're going to be starting off with game number 1. And game number 1 was a Dignitas win. They are able to take game 1 just like they took the series in winners finals to jump out to a nice lead, 1-0. That's exactly where you want to be here. This was a pretty back and forth game. Honestly, a kind of slow game. This really wasn't indicative of what has been going on in the NACL, I would say, over the past year or so, or especially the last couple months, because the NACL's really been very action-packed, very fast-paced, and this game was not. It was very controlled, a very slow early game in particular. We'll get to kind of some of the individual performances in a bit, but I want to hit some of the highlights on what exactly happened in the game. A slow early game. Dig does develop a pretty solid lead, though, just based off of the gold leads on individual lane performances. Hoon is super far ahead of Fake God in this series. I think he's up like 30 CS, and Spawn is in a very similar position in the bot lane on the Draven. Now, when you look at these two comps, you would think that Dignitas would need to be able to generate that early lead when you're looking at a team fight of Zeri with a Maokai, Braum, Cassante frontline, and then a LeBlanc to kind of handle some of the backline problems. If you don't get that Draven ahead, I could definitely see it being a problem in the late game for Dignitas, but they are able to generate those early leads. Renekton and Draven in particular have quite a bit of gold, and Exu is moving around the map. I will say, unfortunately, First Blood does go to Cloud9. Tomio ends up getting it on Insanity in the mid lane. He's just pushed up way too far with no vision. We know that Tomio is really far forward. We saw him in the enemy jungle, or at least Diamond saw him in the enemy jungle, and so you knew he was kind of around the mid lane and definitely capable of ganking. Unfortunately, he just didn't really respect, I would say, the pressure that he was putting on, and you end up dying to First Blood. But, you know, Cloud9 capitalizes on that. Unfortunately for Dig, like, you're looking at this game and you're like, 41 minutes? Well, you know, with an early game comp, how were they able to win this? Well, Cloud9 actually was able to fight back a bit. They were able to bring the gold relatively even, a really good 4-man play bot lane. Diplex ends up getting a double kill in that exchange, so now he's basically 2-0-1 at, like, I would say 11-ish minutes into the game against a comp that is supposed to get outscaled. That's a pretty good thing for a LeBlanc, and gold is relatively even. The only problem is now Hoon is going to get really strong. The Renekton is very mobile and is certainly stronger than the K'Sante at this point in the game. He ends up shutting down Diplex, getting a lot of gold on himself, and Cloud9 don't really have a lot of great answers to Renekton if he does end up getting on the backline. You can chain CC him with things like Maokai, Braum, and K'Sante, but then you don't really have a lot to stop everybody else on the rest of the team, which is just not going to be a super effective fight for you. Spawn, by this point, by the way, that, you know, Hoon's getting strong, Diplex has gotten strong. Spawn has taken, like, both towers in the bot lane by himself, has gotten solo gold on both of them. So this Draven, while he hasn't had a cash out yet, is still ridiculously fed. Like, he's like 40 CS up. He's gotten 2 full towers. Like, he's probably 2k gold up on Lost at this point in the game. Something absolutely ludicrous. I have written down in my notes, Spawn takes 2 full towers at 17 minutes for a shit ton of gold. What do you do? That's what's written in my notes. And so fights are going to be pretty kind of interesting to watch. You know, the LeBlanc is going to be strong, but Dignitas has a lot of ways to deal with that, especially if the Draven's going to be able to deal damage. Big fight in the bot river that Dig does get 2 in. They're able to pick up a 2 for 0, and they do get the dragon. But the big standout moment from that is, of course, Spawn getting the cash out, which has got to be maxed out by this point, about 1,000 gold by its, or 1k gold by itself. And now, once he gets that, like, this game is over. There's really no other way that Cloud9 can win fights from this point onwards. Dig dances around Baron for like 4 minutes. Eventually, they just decide to give it over in favor for Soul, which is fine. Like, I guess it's a good trade. I probably wouldn't have done it the way that they did it. Good for Cloud9 to be able to kind of withhold. I think that was a pretty good macro play from them to be able to get that Baron basically for free, but Cloud9 then gets a little over-aggressive. They go for a fight near Elder that kind of goes their way with the Baron buff. It's not the worst thing in the world, but Spawn wasn't there, and then they try and reinitiate in like a 4v4 with everybody that's left, and Dignitas absolutely obliterates them. They're able to pick up the Elder and just end the game from there. It really is not a close end to the game, which is not what you would have expected considering the 2 comps. Big credit to Dignitas, like, keeping your wits about you and realizing that really all you need to do is get that one fight. If that one fight happens and Draven gets the cash out, he's already like, I don't know, like 5k gold up on Lost basically by himself at that point in the game. Once he gets that cash out, like, the game is over. You really have no way to stop Draven and the Renekton diving your backline. Player of the game for me is going to go to Hoon in the top lane. I felt like his impact, not only in lane of being able to dominate the way that he did, but just being able to spread that into team fights, just diving the backline and basically requiring all of the peel on Cloud9 to get him off of Lost. And Diplex, I think, was absolutely massive. They really had no answer for a Renekton that was this strong, even in the late game, and I felt like he was the most influential member in a lot of these team fights. But again, Spawn getting that cash out was absolutely massive. The damage he was dealing towards the back half of this game is huge. I thought Diamond was really good. Insanity was okay on the Vigar. I want to see a little bit more proactivity from him, but I think generally speaking, it's not entirely his fault. Next, he was good on the Elise. Some of the cocoons were really important, but I would say Hoon, Spawn, and Diamond were definitely the 3 standout players for Dignitas for me. And then for Cloud9 on the other side, you had moments in this game. I think Diplex actually played really well in game number 1 here. He was proactive. He was out there trying to make plays. He was able to generate a lot of leads. He was actually pretty influential in some of these team fights when they were trading, you know, 1 for 1 or 2 for 2. Like, Diplex was a big reason why they were able to trade at all. Unfortunately, in the late game, he was just never going to be able to match the damage that Dignitas had by himself. You really needed that Zeri to get online, and she was just way too far behind at that point. My dud of the game is going to go to Fake God in the top lane. You just can't lose as hard as he did in the early game. Like, K'Sante isn't supposed to be able to go up against Renekton, but he's also not supposed to be down 40, 50 CS at points in the game, which he just was. Like, that was super detrimental, allowing this Renekton to be a major force that can deal with the LeBlanc, that can deal with the Zeri because they can't peel him off. It was game ending for Cloud9. They really had no answers for that. And so Overall, some good and some bad, I would say, for both teams. Dignitas definitely looking a lot better, though. Taking a comp that really needed some cash outs early with the Elise, with the Renekton, with the Draven, at least typically speaking, and being able to translate that into mid-game pressure, I think, was really impressive, even if the early game wasn't, like, quote-unquote perfect. Like, you were relatively even, which is not necessarily what you're looking for. As for Cloud9, I would say just capitalize on the early game a bit more. If you feel like you're going to be able to generate leads in that part of the game, if Dignitas is going to be a little bit less proactive, if these games are going to wait until 8, 9, 10 minutes into the game for a first blood, then go for something that can push the tempo a bit. I think this team is really good at that. I think they're really good in the mid game in particular, and I think that, kind of moving to a strategy like that outside of just like protect the Zeri, I think is going to be a little bit more advantageous for them. But, none of that's going to matter if they can't win game 2. You certainly don't want to go down 0-2 in a series against a team like Dignitas Challengers. This is a must-win game. I've always talked about how I think game 2 is the most important game in a best of 5, because if you go down 0-2, there is such a small chance that you're going to be able to come back and win both game or all 3 games in a row. So this is a must-win for Cloud9, but if Dignitas can get this, the momentum is firmly in their favor. So who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Cloud9 Challengers. They are able to take game number 2 here and tie up the series at 1-1, which is a really big deal. I know it's not necessarily do or die to lose game 2. You're not out of the playoffs. It's not finals over if you lost game 2, but it's pretty close, because you certainly don't want to have to win 3 games in a row against this Dignitas Challengers team that would have a ton of momentum. So C9 being able to win this game as confidently as they did, I think, is a very big positive. They took a lot of the things that I said to heart. I will say that both teams kind of investing into these more hybrid comps, comps that have early win conditions, lanes that they can play for, but also things that are going to help them out a lot towards the back half of the game. For Dignitas, their bot lane was something they really wanted to win with. They go back to the Draven that was so dominant in game number 1, especially early on. We'll get to that. It certainly didn't work the same way in game number 2. And then for Cloud9, you go for the Renekton in the top lane. Fake God trying to get something that he can be a little bit more proactive on. He didn't quite win nearly as hard as Hoon did in game 1, but the Renekton was at least more useful than the Cassante was by far. But let's go ahead and talk about what ended up happening. This was a 32-minute game instead of a 41-minute one, and so was it more dominant? I would say slightly, but it wasn't exactly a perfectly clean game, and I'll talk about why. The game was actually super slow for the first couple of minutes. I would say, first blood was at, 12 minutes into the game, something like that, but a lot of posturing from both of these teams. Tomio doing a great job in the early game of being able to secure objectives. I thought he controlled the map really well. Some good early pathing from him, and then a good job from his laners to be able to assist as well. It felt like Cloud9 had a lot of control over the early part of the game. Eventually, we get a little pick here. Zeyzal kind of getting caught in his own jungle a little bit with XU invading, just basically trying to force something at this point, realizing that Dig was just kind of slowly bleeding out, but Zeyzal's able to survive long enough. He does trade over his life, I should say, but Diplex roams down. Tomio is able to get there, Lost is able to get there, and they're able to get a double kill onto the Swain. Kind of a close quarters fight, which is massive for this, for the Swain, for Diplex here. There's really not a lot of ways that this team has to deal with Swain. The Aurelion Soul is going to be problematic towards the back half of the game, but it's not like he particularly obliterates Swain if Swain's just able to lifesteal through a lot of it, or drain tank, I should say, through a lot of it. So Diplex getting gold in the early game was definitely positive, but that's where things started to fall off the wheels, I would say, for Dignitas. A play that they really felt like they needed to make. They were slowly bleeding out. You have this Draven that you really needed to play for, but Cloud9 doing a good job to keep it on the back foot. Spawn gets caught basically immediately after from a nice gank from Tomio, who, like I said, just had a phenomenal early game. He was able to control a lot of the pressure in this game. His pathing was great, and then he's able to pick up a kill onto Spawn to get rid of all of the stacks at the beginning here. That's really, really big. Sets Cloud9 up into a much better spot. We move on to that second Herald after Cloud9 is able to get the first one. It's actually a 1-for-0 for Dignitas. They actually collapse on it really, really well. Pull out a kill on Fake God, but C9 was already getting Herald at that point, and so it ends up just being a 1 for Herald kind of trade, which I still don't think is all that bad for the side of C9. And then Spawn gets caught again, basically right after third dragon. Cloud9 just kind of collecting dragons without really a care in the world, and Spawn ends up getting caught again in the mid lane. That's not the last time that's going to happen. In fact, it happens basically like 4 minutes after. Spawn gets caught again, but they do initiate a full team fight. Cloud9 does. They want to chase after the Spawn catch and initiate basically a full team fight. Dig would have probably won it from even. The ult from Insanity was really good, kind of piling onto the ult from Ornn and the knockups from XU. You were able to get this like giant wombo combo. Unfortunately, it's just not enough damage to cut through what is a surprisingly beefy front line from Cloud9. Renekton, Maokai, Swain, you're just not going to be able to kill them very fast with the Soraka on the back line as well. And so, while it was a really good attempt coming out from Dig, they just weren't able to get enough of it. It ends up being a 1-for-1. And I would say that does kind of of benefit Cloud9 in that instance because they do just have pressure over the full map. Then we move on to the Baron Soul dance that ends up lasting quite a while, but C9 do grab every ult from Dignitas in a small fight. They go for a full engage. Dignitas has to use everything to disengage. It looks like C9's going to be heading towards the Soul, but Dignitas kind of calls their bluff there and goes straight to Baron, and Cloud9 feels like they have to answer that. Dig does get the prio, but in the 50-50 smite, Tomio is able to come out on top. A massive play there from the C9 jungler who just had a phenomenal game. We'll get to that. They're able to win the fight after that with Baron buff. Some nice posturing, but just not enough from Dignitas. They're able to grab Soul. They're able to grab the Ace. Dig does kind of hold off a bit. They hold off on the first push in the top lane. Some really good disengage coming out from Hoon and XU in particular, who I thought played that fight well. But eventually, C9 buys enough time to get Elder and Baron again, and there's really no way to stop that push from that point onwards. They're able to close out the game from there, but kind of an up and down game, I would say, from both teams. Not exactly as clinical as you would like it, but one player who you certainly can't be frustrated with is Tomio on the side of Cloud9. He was for sure the player of the game for me. A lot of people are going to give it to Diplex. Some people are going to give it to Lost as well for that scoreline, but this was a no-brainer for me. Tomio was the one making all the plays on the side of Cloud9, especially in the early game. This Maokai was doing a great job of being able to set the tempo and create a small lead for C9 that they were able to translate into later leads. The objective stacking is really what gave them the advantage that they needed in the mid to late game here. Yes, I think Lost did a great job team fighting, and Diplex was unkillable through a lot of this game, but Tomio, setting that tone early and then, getting the 50-50 Baron steal, a lot of those engages were on him. Like, he was the one that was making the first move. I don't think Cloud9 wins this game nearly as easily if they don't have one of the best junglers in the league here in Tomio, and he absolutely earned his stripes in this one. But Diplex, Lost were both really good. Zeyzal had some moments on the Soraka. Soraka's just generally so useful as a champion that it's hard for me to say anything bad about it. The only kind of questionable member I would say was Fake God. I still think Hoon played better in game number 2, just like he did in game 1, which is frustrating to say, but it's Renekton. Like, you're going to be able to, do your thing, basically, no matter how you're playing. He was just not nearly as dominant as I wanted him to be in this game, but it certainly wasn't a negative in a grand scheme of things. I think Tomio, Diplex, Lost, Zeyzal were plenty good enough to be able to get this team across the finish line. As for Dignitas on the other side, honestly, you didn't play all that bad. Like, there were some major mistakes, and that's where my dead of the game for Spawn comes into play. His positioning in the mid game was miserable, and I don't know if it's on him, or I don't know if it's on the rest of the team for not shadowing him, but the amount of times that he was just caught pushing wave in the mid lane with nobody around, it's like, why are you stepping up, and also, why is no one shadowing him? It felt like there were so many times where they left the Draven basically on his own, and he just gets picked, and there's really nothing that they can do about it, but you gotta blame Spawn at least a little bit for that, because he's gotta have the wherewithal to realize, like, oh, no vision of the enemy team, I probably shouldn't just be, pushing up past my taken already tier 1 tower in the mid lane and pushing this wave. It just didn't feel like it was all, kind of working out there. The team did leave him to die a lot of times as well, and so just not a lot of positives, I would say, coming out, trying to get this Draven ahead. There were some good engages, like I said. They did try for some wombos with Ornn, Wukong, Aurelion, like Rakan. Like, there's a lot of lockdown that you can do there to try and get a lot of damage out really quickly. Unfortunately, C9's just way too tanky to be able to burst down like that. If you have Soraka ult going on a Renekton, Malphite, Swain frontline, like, if you give them any amount of time, they're just going to be able to win every fight. That's not even counting the amount of damage that Lost was going to be able to do on the backside if you were focusing that frontline like that. And so, really not a lot of, tools that Dignitas could have used. They played okay, but for the most part, I think once they lost early game, there really wasn't a lot of ways for them to be able to come back unless this ASOL got, ridiculously fed. But, now that the series is tied 1-1, it becomes a best of 3, and this is a lot more familiar territory for these two teams. They've played a lot of games this season, or this split, I should say, so far. A lot of best of 2s, but a best of 3 is just one more. You want to be able to take 2-0s in those kinds of series, and so they should be familiar with wanting to win 2 games in a row, but it's going to be a big game 3 to see who ends up grabbing the momentum. Is Dig going to take it back after game number 1, or is C9 going to continue this really nice trend that they showed in game number 2? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Cloud9. They are able to take game number 3 here and take the lead in this series 2-1, pushing it to series point. Of course, in a best of 5, you've only got to win 3, and C9 has now won 2 in a row, which is pretty darn good for this team. The momentum is certainly rolling in their favor at the moment, and this one was probably the most dominant game of the series up until this point. I think in all the other games, there were certainly moments where it felt like either team could win. Basically, from 20 minutes onward, it felt like C9 had control of this game. Now, it wasn't perfect. Gold was even for a lot longer than it felt like, especially watching the game, but pressure was just no question. Like, C9 had all the pressure in this game, and it was really theirs to lose, and luckily for them, they weren't able to lose it. They were a little bit more passive than maybe I would have liked, a little bit more clinical, if you will, than maybe I would have liked, but hey, whatever works, whatever gets you to the finish line, I think I'm gonna be okay with. Let's go game by, or event by event, talking about what happened, at least the major stuff. First Blood was a counter gank in the mid lane by XU. This is actually really well done. Tomio basically full invests into trying to get Insanity locked down here with Diplex in a nice duo combo that I think really could work. If the Elise had not been there, they're able to grab the First Blood onto the Maokai, and then really good pathing from XU. What he does is immediately head down into the enemy jungle, not counter gank, but go to dive bot lane, and it goes really, really well. He's able to not only get a lead for his mid laner, he's able to get a lead for his bot lane as well, especially with the Draven. You want to get gold on that early, and so some really proactive plays, I would say, coming out from XU, but unfortunately, I think that was the last majorly great play for Dignitas in this game. That's kind of where things started to go off the rails. Fake God takes a top lane trade. He's down like 30 CS to Hoon's Jace, which again, Hoon just kind of dominated him in lane in this series, but he ends up picking up the solo kill on a way over-aggressive Hoon who's just not prepping for it. That's the first solo kill of this game for the Renekton. It certainly will not be the last, and that's where Fake God really starts to generate his own lead. We see a lane swap. We see Spawn and Diamond go top lane. Spawn looks like he gets caught out, but a phenomenal play from Diamond here to actually save him with Lantern, be able to land the hook on Lost, burning everything from him, the cleanse, the flash, and, you know, Lost gets out in time, but Diamond does a really good job almost trading that back. It was honestly a little bit scarier for Lost than it was for Spawn, considering it was a 3 for 2. I would consider that a nice play from Diamond. Unfortunately, Cloud9 didn't take too kindly to that play, and so they invest a lot into the top lane. Again, they try and bait it. They know that XU is going to be moving up to try and protect Spawn and Diamond, and so they show 3, and it looks like it's a 3 for 3 on the side of Dignitas, and then the rest of the team for Cloud9 show. They execute the dive, they take down the turret, they win the 5v3, and then all of a sudden this game becomes entirely controlled by C9. That's really the play where I think things started to go kind of off the rails for them. Tomio is doing everything in this game. He ends up going to dive Hoon in the bot lane. This Jace is super far behind, and then I will say the game does slow down a lot in the mid game, and it slows down in the late game as well. It's just kind of a lot of time in between each action. It doesn't really feel like Cloud9 is in a whole bunch of urgency to end this game out. They know that they're going to be able to win a lot of these late game team fights against the Elise, the Tristana, the Jace, the Draven. They know that, you know, securing a lead in the mid game was like really, really big for them, and now they don't really feel a lot of the urgency, and so they're just kind of waiting for Dignitas to either make a mistake or for objectives to come up. Dignitas does equalize a lot in gold, but C9 is getting everything. They're getting every dragon, they're getting every Rift Herald, right? They're just getting everything, every tower on the map. They control all of the map, even if the gold lead doesn't necessarily reflect that. They finally do find a pick in the top lane. The Maokai ult in general was massive for them this game, and they find another 2 members in the top lane that they're able to take down. That gives them Baron basically for free. And then Fake God, I think at the exact same time, finds another solo kill on Hoon. That's his like 3rd of the game or something like that. Fake God continues to find people with stuns in team fights as well. When you look at the front to back ability, Dig does start to pull some stuff back because C9's a little bit lackadaisical in finishing the game, but eventually they just have to give over Baron basically for free because of the poke from the saplings, and there's really just not a lot that they can do to contest that, and then eventually a front-to-back fight takes place in their base that they can't win. Cloud9 playing well. I understand the idea of why they weren't so, like, gung-ho with trying to full engage. I think when they did, it did end up working out. They tried to punish mistakes more than they did try to create opportunities, which I think is fine for a comp that is a little bit more late, well, a lot more late game focused, if we're being entirely honest. I just want to see more killer instinct. They really haven't had that a ton. It feels like they've been playing a little bit more not to lose than to win across this series, but whatever works, I guess, in the end. A lot of their players were super mechanically talented in this game. Fake God didn't win early, but man, did he win every other time. He was down like 30, 40 CS in the early game, and then as soon as he picked up that solo kill on Hoon, he was off to the races. He was destroying him in side lanes from that point onwards in the game. His stuns in front-to-back team fights were so crucial for the team, setting up Lost to deal a ridiculous amount of damage, or Tomio to get that CC chain. Basically, whatever they wanted to do at that point, they could execute because Fake God's engages were so great. Pretty easy choice for player of the game for me, but Tomio was definitely in the conversation for a second game in the row. He has been C9's best player this series, and I don't think it's been particularly close. He's been a lot of fun to watch on this Maokai. At some point, I feel like you've just kind of got to ban it. They've been pretty active in banning out his Sejuani and his Wukong, which are obviously picks that have been super active for him over the course of the split, but with him playing Maokai so well on this day, at least forced him to prove to you that he can play something different at a super high level, because at this point, the Maokai is just giving them way too much value in terms of objective control and like a free initiation. And so I think you have to take that pick away at this point, at least let him prove to you that the Wukong is just as bad. Lost continues to be really good in late game team fights, even if, the early game is still a little bit of a struggle on that Zeri. Zeyzal does his job as the Braum. Diplex was, pretty good on the Gragas. Not really a lot of standout plays, but Cloud9's still really good. Like, there's not a lot of negatives for me to point out. And then for Dignitas on the other side, I'm just frustrated. This team feels like they are going all in on the early game, which most of the time I would consider a good idea, but if you're going to do that, you have to force plays in the beginning part of the game. XU did a good job to be able to generate that lead, but then that lead just slowly started getting chipped away because the macro wasn't quite there for Dignitas. If that's going to be a problem for you, then either you need to just AFK, like fight, because I do think that benefits this Dignitas comp that they ended up drafting in this game, or you need to invest more into the late game. You need to get something that you can front to back with. If you don't think you can beat C9 in front to backs, though, you just simply have to be more aggro in the early game. Make sure that C9's going into that mid game that they've been so good at over the course of this series with a 4 or 5k gold deficit, and then you're going to be in a position where you can probably just kind of snowball the game out of control. If you're going in even as Elise, Jace, Draven, with Cloud9's comp here, you're just not going to be able to win all that easily, and they keep setting themselves up for failure. At least they have in the last couple of games. It's something I really want to see them either full commit to and go in, like be super aggro in the early game, or pivot out into something that's going to be a little bit more versatile throughout the rest of the game. It's going to be interesting, but they're now on series point. They can no longer afford to lose a game if they do. The NACL split is over. Finals is over, and C9 will be hosting that trophy. But Dignitas has more than enough talent to push us to a Game 5. So are they going to be able to do it? Or is C9 going to prove that they really are the best team in the NACL? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Cloud9. They are able to win game number 4, and they are able to crown themselves officially the champions of the NACL Spring Split 2023. Congratulations to Cloud9. They have gone out and they have proven to the world that this org, no matter the turnover, no matter the players, they are going to be the best. They are just so consistent. This org always puts out great talent, and man, did they collect some great talent so far in 2023. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want to talk about the team too much without talking about the game that ended up getting them there, because while I do think it was relatively close, this still was another game that I would consider very Cloud9 favored. It was actually pretty similar to game number 3 in my opinion, a game where Cloud9 dominated a lot of the tempo and a lot of the pressure in the game, did struggle a bit to close it out, but eventually did get there, and that's really all that matters in the end. Really, Cloud9, unlike game number 3, I would say, was actually able to start off incredibly hot in this one. They knew the timings incredibly well. You know who didn't know the timings? Hoon. He was playing way too aggro early on in a lane. It's Kennen versus Gnar. This is a Kennen favored matchup. I've talked about this in the LPL. Kennen's being brought out a ton in the LPL right now, and so I've already done a pretty detailed breakdown of what's supposed to happen in this matchup, and Kennen is certainly supposed to be able to generate the lead so long as he doesn't screw it up early on. Unfortunately, Hoon screwed it up early on. He thought he was going to have coverage from XU. XU was actually doing a really good job, pathing in the early game. He was creating advantages, and then Tomio goes top lane for this big ditch effort to try and kill Kennen, and he ends up getting it. He gets the first blood. He's able to kill the Kennen, and Kennen's game is close to over at this point. There's really not a lot that he can do, and all of a sudden, XU is in a really bad spot because his top laner is not really going to have any pressure, and this is supposed to be a winning lane for them, and so that's not particularly good again, but, it's okay. You can survive that. Like, Kennen can rebound, still going to be useful in team fights. What you can't do is die again. And unfortunately, Hoon pushed up again, doesn't see Tomio coming, and dies again. This supposedly winning matchup of the Kennen into the Gnar is now dead. It's dead in the water. There's nothing Kennen can do. His game is effectively over, and you're now playing a 4v5 basically for the rest of the game, and we'll see that. Kennen ultimates will come out. They'll do basically nothing, and it will die in basically one instant, especially with the fact that you look at Kennen, Maokai, Talia topside, and you're like, oh boy, Gnar Gragas, I guess I can buy Merc Treads for free this game. And there's really not a lot that the enemy team can do. This just becomes a much more difficult game for Dig to actually play out, basically from this point onwards. And it was. Tomio is still super active on the map. He ends up going mid lane to kill Insanity, and it's 3 for 0, like really, really quickly into the game. We're looking at about an 8-minute game where it's 3-0, and Cloud9 has all the pressure in the world, which is massive. He goes bot lane to now try to get the Zeri ahead. It becomes a 3v3, but C9's able to take it 1-0. They're able to blow up the Thresh incredibly quickly. Now it's a 4-0 game. Diplex ends up getting a solo kill on Insanity in the mid lane. Now it's a 5-0 game, and things just continue to kind of spiral out of control. This is a late game comp. This is Kassadin Zeri coming out from Cloud9, and they've got like a 5k gold lead at 15 minutes, and it's just doomed, right? Like, there's no way to play this out and feel comfortable. Aphelios was actually really, really good in this game. We can talk about Dignitas stealing that third Drake to be able to set them up for potentially Soul Point. Spawn actually fighting incredibly well on the backside, ends up trading 1-for-1 in that exchange, and the Aphelios was looking really good, but there's just so much that you can't do from that point on in the game. A massive win for Cloud9 around Baron. It was a clean ace. Tomio basically played it perfectly, did a ridiculous amount of damage for Lost to just go in, press R, and completely clean up, and there's just nothing you can do. You have Hoon, who's doing nothing on the Kennen. Insanity is positioning so poorly in a lot of these team fights. There's really just no way for Dignitas to be able to come back out in this game, and eventually they do just close it out. It does take them a while. They basically sit on their, 10 whatever K gold lead for the next, 10 full minutes. Basically from 25 to 35 minutes, nothing in the game happens. But they still are able to close it out, and that's what really matters in the end. My player of the game is going to go to Tomio in the jungle. I know a lot of people are going to give this to Diplex on the Kassadin. He was really good this game. I don't want to take away from Diplex, but Tomio was the player of the game. He was everywhere in the early game. Those ganks top lane really put Dignitas at such a disadvantage that they really couldn't climb out of. The gank mid, the 3v3 bot, the, maybe not objective control, but like the ability to skirmish well. Even that big final fight near Baron Pit, or not final fight, but like the ceiling fight near Baron Pit. He was the instrumental one creating a lot of the damage for Lost to be able to clean up on. And so, to me, this was like a, defining series for Tomio. This is one that you watch and you go, okay, like, this is the one you're going to look back on when Tomio becomes a star in the LCS and say, like, this is where it all started. I know Cloud9 makes every single jungler that plays on this team look better than maybe they do on other orgs, and, we can look at perhaps what happened to Shaden on EG and what Tomio was on EG last year and say, maybe the ups and downs are still there, but he's always had a ridiculous amount of talent. He was always the player that we were watching out for on Evil Geniuses. It's just been with this group of players and with this infrastructure that he's really been able to unlock it. He's Finals MVP, and it's not particularly close. I know a lot of people are going to give it to Diplex, but to me, Tomio is easily the Finals MVP here and easily the player that you have to look out for. Lost and Zeyzal were really good this series. 4 games of Zeri from Lost can be a little bit of a challenge, especially when you're going against things like Draven in a lot of these games, but he held his own. Even if he wasn't perfect in laning phase, especially in that game 1, his team fighting was always consistent, and he really wasn't ever putting himself in a bad position to be able to get caught out. And that's what really matters. Like, in the end, you just need to be good enough on AD carries to be able to win games, and Lost was more than good enough here. Diplex, like I said, was fantastic on the Kassadin. Fake God did a great job assisting Tomio. I mean, Kennen's game getting completely shut down was GG for Dig, and Fake God was a big part of that. The combos that they were able to pull off in the mid game there, I think that third gank top lane where, Tomio was able to hit Cask immediately into Gnar ultimate, it's just beautiful to watch, and it's great to see the synergy between these two players. But congratulations, all 5 of these guys are now champions in the NACL, and they all deserve it. They were some of the best players in their roles, respectively, across the board, and I think that really shows you the power of Cloud9. As for Dignitas on the other side, it's a frustrating way to lose your season and to lose your split. But unfortunately, it's going to be ending here. You went 4-4 against Cloud9 this year, and you end up losing the finals. That's definitely got a sting, but this game number 4 was not particularly good. Hoon has to be done to the game. I mean, his disrespect of the early pathing coming out from Tomio is what lost them the game, but, Insanity didn't play particularly well. I don't think Diamond had a lot of really good hooks in this game 4. Spawn was looking okay, and I think XU had some good early pathing, but again, there's really just not much you can do. Instead of harping on this game number 4, I want to talk about the good things that Dig did over the course of this split. This team was incredibly dominant in the regular season. Now, they did falter a bit towards the back half, and that's why I maybe didn't have as much confidence as some other people going into the playoffs. I actually had them as a quick out in the playoffs, but that should show you just how much this team has grown over the course of the split. I think Insanity's consistency has really come back. I felt like his 2023 wasn't quite as dominant as I was hoping for it to be. He was my number 1 mid laner in the preseason. He wasn't quite that for me in the regular season, but he was maybe the best player in the playoffs up until the finals. He was great. Spawn, know, I mean, poor guy got completely thrown to the wolves at the LCS level, was put in a situation that he was never really going to be comfortable with, and clearly lost his mental. He gets sent back down here to the league that he quite frankly dominated last year in 2022, and he reasserts himself. He was one of the best AD carries in the league for the time he played. Diamond is absolutely the same thing in the support position. Whether it was Tomo, whether it was Spawn, he was always winning lane, and he was always super useful in team fights. And then Hoon took that leap this year. Like, we were talking about him as maybe the worst top laner in North America at the end of 2022. He took that leap. He was maybe the best top laner in the NACL over the course of this split. XU's always been good. There's nothing I can say about him that's new. He was my #1 jungler going into the split, and he was probably a top 1 or 2 jungler in the entire league. He was incredibly good, and he always has been, but this Dignitas team should not be hanging their heads. They are the worst team in the LCS and one of the best teams in the NACL. This talent is so close to just getting a full-blown call-up, and they shouldn't feel bad about anything, especially losing to a team like Cloud9 in the finals. But congratulations to C9. They absolutely deserve to be hoisting this trophy, and it's going to be interesting to see where this organization moves in the future. But alright, that is going to do it, not only for this video, but for the NACL Spring Split. I really appreciate you guys coming along with me in this journey. The NACL's been a lot of fun to cover over the course of the year so far. Of course, it's not done. It's just finishing up for now. We're going to be back in summer. I'm incredibly excited to talk about it. Of course, up on the screen now, you'll see the C9 Champions graphic. I hope they don't get mad at me for using this in my video. I don't think that they will care. I don't think anyone is going to see this, but hopefully I don't get copyright strike for this in some way, somehow. But I really do hope you guys enjoyed the NACL content. I love making it. The NACL really is my passion league. It's my favorite to cover. You know, I really enjoy watching the games. I'm really passionate about the ecosystem of North America continuing to grow in the League of Legends scene, especially a lot of these players that haven't been given the same opportunities that maybe some others have that have been considered prodigies. So I'm really, really excited and happy to cover this league, and I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did too. Let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think is going to be happening moving into summer. I'm really excited to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. There's going to be perhaps some shakeups. Obviously, the promotion tournament's going to be coming out for the provisional amateur teams. We're going to see how those teams kind of end up faring, but I'm incredibly excited to cover it when it does end up coming out. Congratulations to Cloud9, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.